the last 5 years have seen some incredible growth in the stock markets. There's been an incredible 95% return on the S&P 500. There have been some amazing stocks that have gone up thousands of percent. TD Bank stock is not really one of them. These guys are the third largest market cap right now. It's one of the most held retail stocks in Canada, and they're looking at a 5-year return of about 6.5%. In simple terms, TD's gone nowhere. And if you're hoping that the next 5 years might help catch you back up, the US Attorney General just had some pretty bad news for you. Now, hold on a second. I'm not saying TD is not a good investment, or it hasn't necessarily been one. I'm just saying that there might be a couple tough years for investors. You might be asking why. Well, if you've been looking at the news at all, you've probably seen that the Department of Justice in the United States has fined TD Bank $3 billion for failure to catch hundreds of millions of dollars that were laundered through their banks by all sorts of people doing all sorts of illegal stuff. Obviously, big deal, really bad. One thing that caught my eye though, and I think caught a lot of attention from investors, was that there is a asset cap being placed on TD's American business. If you're a growth investor and you've been looking at TD as a potential opportunity, well, TD can no longer operate with more than $434 billion under management in the United States. This puts a huge limit on TD's overall expansion, and it mirrors something that happened to Wells Fargo back in 2018. If you take a look at Wells Fargo stock since then, it's up about $2. That's pretty tough compared to Goldman Sachs, who's about doubled in the same time. Now, I'm not saying TD's Wells Fargo. I'm not saying it's apples to apples, but as somebody who's hoping for a little bit of dividend and a little bit of growth, you're obviously not going to see one of those two things for the next little while in TD. So the obvious question, how is this fine, this $3 billion and this asset cap, going to impact the next 5 to 10 years? So not just the immediate future, but sort of the longer term. And as I sort of thought about this, I realized two important things. One, I am not a TD Bank investor, nor am I an expert in this stock. I haven't been analyzing TD stock. This isn't something I've spent a huge amount of time on. I've been reading the news to get a lot of my information. I also own RBC and National Bank, so I have some pretty sort of skewed opinions, right? I've obviously picked some competitors. And two, TD investors might have their own opinions. They might not be thinking about this the same way that I am or people in the news are. So I figured if I wanted to get a sense of what TD investors were thinking and get sort of a sense of what they think will happen in the next 5 years, I needed to ask them. So I put a poll up on an app called Blossom. It's a finance social media. It's sort of focused on Canada. It's a really good spot to find people that are interested in specific stocks or specific sectors and ask them things. So I asked very simply, what are you worried about? And sort of open-ended, right? And I gave them 4 categories in a poll to pick. Now, the first category was the least popular. And that was those people that were really worried about the fine, that thought that maybe the fine was going to be the biggest impact on the stock in the next 5 years. Even at $3 billion, TD makes so much money that that's probably not going to be life-changing or even strategy-changing for them. They have enough money to just eat that fine and move on. However, I do see how investors would think that money's not going to me, right? They'd rather that $3 billion be in a dividend or a share buyback. And 2, that money's not getting reinvested in the business. Obviously, that sucks. $3 billion, right? It's a sort of a funny amount of money. You could do so much with that. There are so many companies out there that have like these really cool ideas or interesting sort of fintechs or whatever that is less than $3 billion that they could have totally gambled on and would have made more than just giving it to the government. The next category of people, sort of the second place group, was people who were worried about bad publicity. And I honestly think this is pretty valid. I mean, even my mother asked me the other day about TD Bank and joked about the fact that they had done all this stuff and they had missed all this crime, right? So there's been some damage to TD's brand. Now, I'm pretty sure most of these people were worried about the US specifically because TD is such a sort of household name up here in Canada that everybody knows who they are, right? We've all seen TD Bank branches. We've all seen things sponsored by TD. There's big TD Bank buildings. Canada knows who TD Bank is, but if you're an American and you don't know them, you might have only heard about them because of these fines, because of what they've done. So you probably in your head are thinking like, oh, these guys are maybe not who I want to work with or partner with or invest through or whatever, right? So if you've never heard about TD, it's not really a great first impression. Third on the list were investors who are worried about the asset cap. And honestly, if I was going to pick this poll, I would have clicked that button. I think that's a big deal. And the reason why it's such a big deal to me is because, as I understand it, a big part of TD's strategy is something called growth by acquisition, which is basically the idea of purchasing companies that are growing in order to grow as a whole firm. And so this is how they sort of had got their place in the American market, how they were growing the American market, and now they're fully blocked. They are not allowed to do that. When I was thinking about how this is going to impact them, I talked about this earlier. I looked over at Wells Fargo, and you'll see that Wells Fargo's total return has been tough over the last 5 years. And I could see how that would scare TD investors. Wells Fargo got hit with an asset cap. They weren't allowed to grow. They weren't allowed to acquire. And they've sort of just had to sit and wait. And it doesn't look like Wells Fargo investors are very happy about it, right? It hasn't really gone anywhere. And the problem isn't, oh, okay, this isn't going to go anywhere, but I'm still going to get a dividend, so I still make a minimum amount of return. The problem is you could have invested that into Goldman Sachs, right? If you're a Wells Fargo investor, you could have doubled your money. And I'm sure a lot of those people, if they had perfect hindsight, would have invested in something else. And that's saying that you're going to stay invested in a bank specifically. A lot of people who are invested in TD, or as I understand it at least, are invested for dividend growth. And you might be thinking, well, that's something I've talked about here on this channel. So shouldn't I sort of want to be invested in a company like this? The idea is that dividend growth over time is going to sort of snowball, and eventually you'll be making so much in dividends off such a small amount of money, your yield on cost goes up so high that it's like an amazing, amazing return. Well, the problem is that dividend growth investors are looking for consistent growth. And if TD's strategy changes, maybe TD can't keep that growth up. I'm not 100% certain how that's going to go, obviously, but investors are at least worried about it. And if you think about the other options in banking, you're looking at RBC, National Bank, CIBC, or you're looking outside of banking. There are lots of other dividend growth companies out there that maybe are offering a similar sort of profile from your perspective as a dividend growth investor. The thing that interested me the most, though, was the group of people that won the poll that had the biggest amount were people who thought that their focus should be on buying the dip, that they were worried about how they could possibly get more shares of TD. And I think that's really interesting, is that these people are still willing to be pouring their money into this company. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. People told me two things when they talked about buying the dip here. Number one, there's been a huge impact on TD stock over a short amount of time. And it doesn't really reflect a huge change in their business. Yes, they lost some money in a fine. Yes, they have a limit, but it's not like they're losing money quarter over quarter or that their other businesses around the world have failed. It's just this one part of their core business that has been stopped / sort of slowed down. The second thing is that they're looking super long term, and that TD has a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of opportunity. And now that they're not allowed to look at the US, they're going to deploy that somewhere else. Somebody told me that TD only really made about 33% of their revenue, like a third-ish of their revenue in the US. And so if 66% of their business grows at full rate, maybe they can keep the dividend growth about the same. With all of that, I personally think TD's probably in trouble, and I don't think I'm going to buy it. I don't think I'm going to buy it because I've already bought RBC, I've already bought National Bank, I've already even bought EQ Bank, and I've got all these other dividend growth companies that are in that portfolio that I've been making that are focused on Canada. So I don't think investing in this company specifically fits my portfolio, but it might fit yours. If you're really looking for dividend growth, TD might still be a good option. I think, again, National Bank is who I would pick personally, but I totally respect that these people are willing to invest. They're looking sort of past the troubles in the near term. They're looking to the long term, and they're not worried about what happened to TD in the US. Now, if you're a TD investor, I would really love to hear from you, because again, I talked to some people over on Blossom. I've had a couple opportunities to watch people talk about TD and sort of give their opinions. And these people typically, when they're talking about this, they're either invested, or they know people who are invested, or they really care about this company. And they've had the opportunity to sort of educate me a little bit about why you would pick this company over others. But I would love to hear it like straight from an investor, because I'm still learning, right? I'm still sort of refining my portfolio. I'm sort of scaling it from the beginning. And I would rather know now sort of the reasoning behind people's investments in different companies that are in the same space as the ones I'm picking, because maybe they're right and I'm wrong, right? That's always the sort of the struggle of being a stock picker. But at least from a surface level, from what I can see, it does look like TD's in trouble, right? Like, just flat out, you don't want to be caught doing this. You don't want to be in trouble with the US government. You don't want an asset cap or a fine or any of this publicity. None of that's good for the company, but it could be good for investors. It could be good if you're looking for a discount on a stock and you've got the money and you've got the time. So lots of really interesting stuff. Really, really interested here. I think it's going to be a learning opportunity. I really do think that we're going to look back on this in, again, 5, maybe 10 years, right? That long-term future when the dust is fully settled and they've had an opportunity to plan out a new strategy, to execute on that strategy. And we'll sort of see, and maybe TD will have beat all of the other banks, right? That would be totally in the realm of possibility, because if they plan their way out of this, it might become the best Canadian investment over the next 5 years. Could totally happen. Or maybe this is really going to stick with them and they won't figure out a way through this, and you would have made way more money in a Royal Bank or a National Bank. Or maybe somebody will come out of nowhere and the banking industry will be revolutionized. Who knows? Really interested though. Again, please, if you're an investor, if you picked this stock specifically, let me know why. Let me know what sort of things have made you choose TD over the other options, and what sort of things I should be looking at, in your opinion, that might help me make the same kinds of decisions, right? That might help sort of refine what we're talking about here, because it's all about investing in Canada on this channel. And with that being said, folks, that's all I have for today. I hope you have a great one. It's beautiful out here. The fall is really starting to go all gold and red, and it's really, really pretty. So have a great one, and I'll see you in the next video.